Hey guys and girls, welcome back. The brewing process is done. Everything went great. The wort looked fantastic. Little dark for the style that I was going for, but that's okay. Sometimes these things happen. So what's next? Well, first, you need to look into how to chill the beer. There are a couple different methods. One is the really expensive method, which is to get a copper wort chiller, and those run about $70. I don't have one of those. I have a cooler, and what I do is I take my wort pot and I put it in the cooler, and then I put ice all around it, fill it all the way up to the top on the sides with ice, and then I put water over it. Some people say you can use salt with that as well. Whatever you choose to do. Either way, it will help the water, or it will chill the wort pretty quickly. It usually happens within an hour. Keep an eye on it. The temperature that you want is somewhere between 65 and 70 degrees, which is really good for the yeast. Speaking of the yeast, your next step is to pitch the yeast. Now, there are three different kinds of yeast that you can get, or actually there are lots of different kinds of yeast, but there are three different methods that you can use. One is you can use the dried yeast and rehydrate it. This is my least preferred method. Second is use what's called a smack pack. Now, smack pack is basically just like it sounds. You have a bag, usually comes in a bag about that big, and it's got a little vial inside, and you break the vial by smacking the bag. And what that does, that breaks that little vial open, and all the yeast escape, and there's food in there for them, and you let it sit a couple hours, and it puffs up to a nice big bag, and then when you're ready to pitch the yeast, you just dump that whole thing in there, and it comes out great. The final method, and actually I think this is going to be my method of choice, is the vial. Now, this tube of yeast, you shake it up real good, you burp it a couple of times, just little twist of the cap, and then when it's time to pitch the yeast, like I say, when your wort gets the right temperature, open it up, dump it in, and let it do its work. Now, once you've done all that, it's time to transfer to the fermentation bucket. Fermentation bucket. This guy right here, you'll transfer it in there. You'll have a lid like this. It's got a little hole in the top, and it's got a gasket that goes in there that looks like that. And then you put your bubbler in. Put a little bit of sanitizer up to the fill line, and after about, once you seal it up, after about 24 hours, it will start to bubble. That's why it's called a bubbler. And what that is, that's the gases escaping because your yeast are working in there. Now, if you don't see any bubbling happening within, say, 48 hours or so, may want to give it about 3 days, and then check your beer. I have had it happen where it doesn't look like it's doing anything, but in fact the yeast are doing their work. The only real way to tell is to wait until the end of the fermentation process, and that's about 10 days. So, once it's done fermenting, you need to transfer to your other bucket. You see, this one's got a hole in it. In that hole goes this little spigot. Down in the bottom of your fermentation bucket, all the yeast, the hops, all that stuff, you don't want that in your bottled or kegged beer. So what you need to do is get the beer off. And this is called taking the beer off the trub, because all that stuff down in there, that's called the trub. Which, interesting fact, you can make bread with that. I've never tried it, but people have. So you use a transfer tube, just like this one, and you transfer it from one bucket to the other, and use your spigot, and either transfer your beer to bottles. If you're going to be bottling, then you need to use priming sugar. Boil some water, put your priming sugar in. This comes with your kit. Put your priming sugar in, and I usually use about a pint of water is plenty, and dump it into your beer, and then transfer beer to the bottles. Make sure your bottles are clean and sanitized. And then you have these caps, and you have a capper, because cappers are good for caps. Put your cap on the bottle, just like this, and then what you'll do is just put this on here, pull the handles down, and it caps your beer for you, and you end up with something like that. Now, really important when you're collecting bottles, make sure you have the ones with the ridge. You don't want twist-offs. Twist-offs are useless. You will end up with bad beer if you try to cap a twist-off. The other method is you can keg your beer. Kegging is expensive. For my kegging setup, by the time I got my kegs, my CO2 tank, my all my tubes and everything like that, and my gauges, and my kegerator, which I actually used a modified freezer, I probably spent about $400 on my kegging system. If you're a beginner, don't start with that method. You're just learning. Do the bottles and see if you like it. Not everybody likes brewing. Brewing is hard. But for today, I think that about does it. Just to recap what we've done, we've talked about how to clean and sanitize all your equipment. We've talked about the actual brewing process. We've talked about chilling. We've talked about fermentation of your beer and what happens during that process. And finally, we've talked about how to bottle or keg your beer. With these tools, guys, you should be able to go out, look up some literature, go down to my old Kentucky Homebrew, talk with those guys down there. They're fantastic. Get yourself a starter kit. I recommend, getting something that has all the equipment you're going to need. Also, you can take their Wednesday night class, which is absolutely fantastic. Whatever the case, enjoy yourselves, brew some good beer, and have a great day.